Well, hi, everyone. My name is Jonas Edman. I'm an instructional designer at the Stanford Program on International and Cross-Cultural Education, also known as SPICE. And together with Gary Mukai, who's the director of SPICE. Gary, do you want to give a little wave back there? We have had the honor and the privilege of working with these 7 exceptional educators up here. We've met with them monthly, and for Gary and I, it's just such a privilege. And we have, this is the 10th year that we've done this, and we learned so much and are so inspired by the fellows that we get to work with. And it's one of the best parts of our job. And we're really excited that today the fellows are here to share their projects. So we'll have 3 presentations, and then we'll break for a 15-minute Q&A. And then we'll have the remaining 3 presentations afterwards. So to get started, we have Lisa Gilbert. So go, Lisa. Okay. I think I know how to do this. There we go. Okay, hi. Let's see, is that playing? Yeah. So I'm Lisa Gilbert from Cabrillo College, and together with my colleague Carmina Eliason, I've been working on reimagining environmental science with curriculum rooted in connection. And this is thanks in part to a Department of Education Title III Accesso STEM grant, in addition to the Global EPIC Fellowship in Global Studies. So most students come to introductory environmental science, looking to get their general education science course completed. But from my perspective, it's very much an opportunity for connection. And so I work hard in all my courses. These are all introductory level gen ed courses to get students to connect with themselves, with each other, and with what it means to be a scientist. We've got amazing opportunities where we are out on Monterey Bay to go and collect data. So students aren't just learning from the textbook, but like looking on the screen from the instrument that we just deployed in the ocean to understand what's happening. And so then we also get to bring those data back to the classroom and think about sort of how our local perspective fits into a much bigger global system of how the ocean works, how the atmosphere and earth are all connected. And students get a chance to see themselves as scientists and not just learning about science. And so what is different about this course now, as a result of the EPIC Fellowship, is in addition to this, which I've been doing, actually everything I'm showing you on the screen is just from this past year, the last semester and this current semester, getting students in partnership with state parks and universities, doing a lot of field work. But I really want to help students, as in this quote here, move from identification, also known as that process through which we say what is what, to identification, the process through which we expand our empathy and the boundaries of who we are become more fluid because we identify with the experience of someone different. And that someone different could be another person far away, could be another species like a whale, could even be non-living beings like the folded rocks that we see on the beach when we go on a field trip. And students, we're trying to explain to each other how these rocks fold and embodying it. And I think that those ways of identifying really came through in the way that I reframed this course with the work this semester. And so now, instead of just being about physical, biological, chemical, etc., we frame the class as introducing environmental issues of water, food, energy, biodiversity, and climate, as well as how they're interrelated. And we emphasize interdisciplinary approaches, including Western and non-Western scientific inquiry, media, ethnography, and indigenous knowledge across time and place, from global systems to local and personal stories. So this is the official course catalog description that we're proposing as of next year for what the course looks like.
And so the course is centered around a lot of human issues that stretch, all around the world, right? We've already heard today about food and water, and we've seen dry soil and the ways in which energy intersect with those things. And so this course is about that. Our students grew a lot of the food that you're seeing in the slides behind me. We sit together, we eat together, and think about our local systems. And then the idea is to, go beyond just where do we get our water, how do we grow our food, to the bigger system. Yeah, I took this picture on campus in August when I was here. And my family knows when we were driving cross country, I kept taking pictures of water fountains. And so thinking about, energy too is a local and also a very globally interconnected thing. And this is a picture of Moss Landing towers very near us. So now the course is framed around these 4 lenses: the imagined, the global, the regional, and the personal. And I want to, for the next 6 minutes, give you some examples of the water story. So we start with the imagined space and still suits in Frank Herbert's Dune, where body fluids are recycled and conserved. And think about that as like, an imagined future that may be possible. We don't know. But I think it's useful to think about that space. And then to go out and think about, well, what are people in the world doing now? Here's some sand dams being constructed in Kenya. This is a women-led effort where it rains a lot for a short amount of time. And then if you build a dam full of sand, the sand can hold on to that water and you can put a little shallow well and access it all year. And so thinking about that example and where that applies. Another example of water conservation would be fog nets in Chile, right? So sand dams aren't going to work up in the mountains, but a different way of collecting water and using it. And that's very much tied to geography of that place. Turns out in Santa Cruz, we have some fog net experiments going on too. So that's a relevant thing that's happening elsewhere and happening locally for us. When we think about water for us locally, we also recycle water kind of at a bigger scale where we're drawing a lot of water out of the ground for agriculture, and the seawater is intruding into those wells. So we're recycling, in our community, we're recycling wastewater and pushing it back in the wells to keep the salt water out. And that connects to a much bigger global story of water. And I used to start my classes about water, like with this diagram. But now this is like at the end, after we thought about all these stories locally and globally, imagined stories. And then we move into thinking about how does this, for us personally too, as individuals, how do we relate to water? And so we get to kind of dive in deep to that. For some students, that's a very artistic thing. Other students are very concerned with, like, we have to buy all of our water in my community. There's not fresh water that's safe to drink. We talk, this is a group of students sitting outside discussing indigenous practices near Big Sur when we were on a field trip. And so we're thinking about our own personal relationships with water in our communities in a local sense and relating those back to the bigger story. And the final thing that I want to emphasize too is the sense of responsibility that comes with all of this, that my students have expressed how much they feel their education is a privilege and to get to be able to give back. And so here's a couple of short clips from the theater department did the musical SpongeBob this fall. And so my students made these like stamps for kids to make with the character and then the real organism to like learn more about to learn more about kind of like how the ocean works. And so we had 500 school kids come to campus for one of the productions, and my students made these amazing exhibits that were up in the lobby for 3 weeks while the musical was playing as a way to give back and connect back. Like what we're doing, the research we're doing, isn't something that's far away done by people that you've never met. It's like your cousins and your siblings and all kinds of people in the community. And so what I want to kind of leave you with is this idea that to help empower students to be community-minded and solution-oriented for the future, these kind of 4 lenses of the imagined, global, local, and personal are really critical. And I should mention this was a quilt project in a different class. Students kind of all contributed squares, and then one student put them together. And there's a lot of rich history on the world with textiles too. So that was just fun to put up. But these 4 lenses, I think, are really critical for how students consider the relevance of science in their own lives and the agency they have when confronted with what feels like, a daunting future. And so the last thing I'm going to put up on the screen is a quote from Octavia Butler, who kind of gets at this idea. And it starts with, so why try to predict the future at all if it's so difficult, nearly impossible? Because making predictions is one way to give warning when we see ourselves drifting in dangerous directions. Because prediction is a useful way of pointing out safer, wiser courses. Because most of all, our tomorrow is the child of our today. Through thought and deed, we exert a great deal of influence over this child, even though we can't control it absolutely. And that's what I hope my students leave with, a feeling of that. Thank you.
Jessica Moronez.
Okay. Hey, folks. My name is Dr. Jessica Moronez, and this is my project on global portrayals of women's criminality and enhancing women's prison education. I'm part of Chaffey College, which is located in San Bernardino County, in Rancho Cucamonga specifically. And I teach here with the beautiful foothills in the background. I also teach here. This is California Institution for Men with it's a state prison in California. And then we have our watchtowers, picture of the watchtower there. And I also teach at California Institution for Women. Another watchtower, this is on our campus, I guess we would consider it. But also there is a playground in the background, an empty playground in that area, and I kind of wanted to highlight that. These are pictures of the exterior of these areas. I want to give you a little bit of insight in what the interior of these areas look like. I'll start with CIW because that's our best one. That one looks like, when I go there to teach, it looks like a traditional classroom. There's computers, there's desks, there's whiteboards, we have a smart board, books, etc. So that's sort of what that space looks like, and that's the space that I want to concentrate on today for my talk. The other CIM, which was the first prison I showed you, that one has 3 yards. So one of the yards is actually really nice because it has air conditioning, and all my other yards at the men's prison don't. So that's the one I like the most because it gets pretty hot in the summer. But that one also computers, desks, books, etc. The next yard, which is our C yard, it's a converted cafeteria. So the way that looks is they have our lunch tables. They are like desks to us, so we use that as desks. There's a big inoperable oven also there on the outside, and it's between 2 grill gates, steel doors, and it's kind of smack in the middle of housing residents. So that's our C yard. Our A yard is probably the most unique. It is a big hub, humongous sort of hangar-looking building, and in that one, we have some partitioned areas. That is an interesting space that has some dead insects next to my desk at all times. Never fails, doesn't matter what season it is. There's also a cat named Mr. Poopers who comes into that one, into that space and lives up to his name. And he casually cleans himself there. There's also a bat that I've never met this bat before, but apparently there's a bat always coming from the rafters everywhere. But I've yet to see that bat. But I do see Mr. Poopers frequently. But so that's the space in which I work. In these spaces, they are part of a larger organization, and that organization is called the Rising Scholars Network. Chaffey College is part of the Rising Scholars Network. That network has helped to educate currently incarcerated folks, formerly incarcerated folks. According to the California Community College website, It consists of 80 grants, and it served 20,000 students in the entire community college across all 116 community colleges. For Chaffey College, we started in 2004, so we've been serving students for 21 years, specifically at CIW. This is what the breakdown looks like for CIW for last year. So the racial breakdown, we have 1% Native American students at CIW, 1% Asian American, 19% African American, 33% Caucasian, 38% Hispanic, and 8% with missing data. 53% of CIW students are age 40 or older, which is such a difference than the main campus, in which only 8% on the main campus are 40 years older or older. So it's a 45% difference there. In terms of the number of students, we have about 60 to 70 students enrolled in CIW this semester. I chose to focus my project on women at CIW and creating a curriculum for them. Why focus on women? Generally, when we look at the carceral system, women essentially remain very invisible when we think of the carceral system. So there's need based on the complexity of gender, and those needs are often not met. In terms of prison curriculum, traditionally, we see that there are some educational disparities that exist with women's prisons and with men's prisons. With women's prisons, they generally take courses that involve secretary work or culinary arts. So I really decided that I wanted to create or enhance my sociology of gender course in order to make it global, but also with a specific focus on women. And some of my decisions are based on the women's feedback and sort of the things that, as an educator, that comes up every semester with them. These are my course learning objectives for that course. I chose Objective 1, identify cultural expectations affecting male-female roles in various societies, and Objective 7, compare and analyze the legal and economic status of women and men in other nations and in the U.S. So for Objective 1, the cultural differences and expectations vary by gender. So, for example, expectations related to criminality, that varies, and women's criminality is essentially not expected in every society. Objective 7, compare and analyze the legal and economic status of women and men in other nations, hint the global part of it, and in the U.S. Criminal justice system, that's part of the legal system, therefore looking at women's criminality or perceived criminality, the portrayals on a global scale will meet that objective. I chose a couple countries to look at for this project. I chose El Salvador, I chose Brazil, and I also chose a historical part of the latter part of the Ottoman Empire. This is countries with rising rates of incarcerated women since 2000 compared to their own country standard. You'll see that El Salvador and Brazil, they have high rates in comparison to what they used to have in 2000. So I chose a Middle Eastern Studies journal for the first part to look at the Ottoman Empire, because actually it's a Stanford scholar who wrote this article, so I wanted to include Gisam Sivri on this. But this is her article, and it was based on the sort of positive discrimination that pregnant women who are incarcerated experience. So within this, what she found out is the ways in which women experience things, for example, or pregnant women, they experience things like being able to serve out their prison sentences after giving birth. They also experienced not being chained in certain areas so that it wouldn't hurt the unborn child. These practices also allow during this time of the Ottoman Empire, allowed mothers and children to be in separate wards, and some of those wards allowed them to breastfeed and also to care for their children. The next one is Brazil. I wanted to look at this one too. I used a Stanford clip that's called I Prisoner. It focuses on mothers. It talks about the ways in which the Brazilian Constitution has taken some initiative to change the ways in which mothers have been traditionally incarcerated. So what they have done is they've actually, for women who are mothers up to the age of, or I'm sorry, who have children up to the age of 12, they've allowed them to essentially do like a house arrest rather than a formal detention in a prison. So I wanted to include that. And then my last component of this is El Salvador. And I chose this, by the way, before all the news about El Salvador prisons. Once again, El Salvador prisons in those types of contexts, they focus on men. So I wanted to look at El Salvador and focus on women, specifically mothers. This is another Stanford resource that I grabbed. This is called Fly So Far Away. And it focuses on women who have had stillborn births and how in El Salvador, since abortion is since El Salvador is one of the 5 countries in which abortion is completely prohibited, sometimes when women have stillbirths, there's some kind of like muddy circumstances in which these women have been accused of homicide, actually. So I wanted to focus on this for the students to discuss at CIW. I think it really talks about just the ways in which, even in times of loss and grieving, how the criminal system essentially can still be so impactful and also kind of harmful for women who are experiencing loss of a child through the stillbirths. I do have some other things that I want to do with this project. I just got accepted to a fellowship recently with the American Council of Learned Societies, and I want to continue this work. I'm going to be looking at early American women and kind of the ways in which they've been punished and for what types of crimes or supposed crimes. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jessica. Next, we have Francisco Nájera.
Hello, everyone. My name is Francisco Nájera. I am a instructor of ethnic studies at Orange Coast College in Costa Mesa, Southern California. I wanted to start just by really thanking Jonas and Gary and Kristen. You guys have been amazing. My project is called Centroamericanos en Diáspora. Central Americans in Diaspora, Transnational Worldviews in Central American Studies. So the aim of my project is to develop Central American Studies modules with a global perspective that can be included in Latinx Studies and Chicanx Studies courses, and that will serve as building blocks toward a future course in Central American Studies. The field of Central American Studies is kind of unique in that it's born out of ethnic studies to some degree, but it has it also has huge connections with Latin American studies, and it has that transnational perspective. A lot of this is because of the relatively recent immigration of a huge proportion of the Central American population in the United States. For those of you who may not be aware, there had been a longer standing Central American population, but pretty small in numbers until about the 1980s, when there was a number of wars going on in Central America, particularly in Nicaragua, in El Salvador, and in Guatemala. The U.S. had a large part in a lot of those wars, funding a lot of the governments of some of those countries, and huge numbers of refugees came to the United States in the 80s, 90s, and ever since, really. And so the community is pretty recent. As such, we see this reflected in the field of Central American Studies itself, right? So there are a number of programs, but they're all pretty new. The big one is at Cal State University Northridge. They started a program in Central American Studies in the year 2000. It became a full-fledged department of Central American Studies. Now it's called the Central American Studies and Transborder Studies department, and they're definitely the premier program in the field. There's a few other four-year universities that also have some programs. The university, UCLA, has a program that really started in 2010. So again, very recently. Cal State LA also has a program. I wasn't able to pinpoint the exact date that program started. I got some conflicting information, but I know they have a minor in Central American Studies. And then for community colleges, we have a program in East LA College. Again, the premier among among the community colleges. They offer 3 classes. It's really robust. But then outside of that, there was no other community college that even had a course in Central American Studies until in the fall, there will be one, San Diego Mesa College. And so it's a situation where you have a couple of very robust programs in the field, and then almost nothing in the vast majority of colleges. So in terms of my project, I really wanted to help create something that would be useful for educators, for instructors to use in many community college settings, either as parts of a course in perhaps Chicano studies or Latinx studies, and to be able to grow from that, right? So the key aspects of my program, I really wanted to start with the voices of students, of Central American students, hearkening back to the history of ethnic studies, right? If we know the history of ethnic studies in the late 1960s, it was really a student activist led fields that were developed at that time, right? And they weren't called ethnic studies at the time. They were individual fields, Chicano studies, Black studies, so on and so forth. And so following that, I really wanted to hear the voices of students, right? These were students who fought for these fields, and not only fought to create them, but they developed the fields themselves. They wrote the curriculum because there was no one else who could do it, right? They were the experts. And so, again, honoring that history, I wanted to hear from students. So I contacted Stanford Central American Student Association, CASA, and I talked to a number of students. And through them, we developed themes, ideas for what they wanted to learn about their own cultures and histories. I also spoke to a number of key Stanford faculty members, and I did a review of, again, the programs that I mentioned earlier, those that already existed, to help me develop some themes for curricular units. These are the themes that we developed with those, again, mostly coming from the students themselves. Central American histories, right? Histories of the individual countries of the 7 countries of Central America, but also of individual ethnic groups, indigenous groups, and others. Looked at indigenous Central America, which was a big theme, focusing on a number of different indigenous groups throughout the area. Black culture of Central America that often gets overlooked, looking at a number of different groups, particularly the Garifuna, the Creole populations along the Atlantic coast. We looked at U.S. imperialism in Central America as part of its larger history, but that specific theme of the U.S. involvement in Central America and how it was so key to so much of the history and particularly the history of migrations for folks. We looked at social movements within Central America, but then also transnational movements or social movements within the United States. Migration stories were another major topic. People wanted to know more about their families' history of migration. We talked about the growing diaspora and this idea of diaspora, which I think was new to a lot of the students, but which was a really interesting way of thinking about the Central American community that was so spread out. We talked a lot also about creating communities, particularly in the United States, but also in some of those different diasporic spaces. And then centering also the voices of queer and trans Central Americans. And lastly, the Central American Studies historiography, right? Just a history of the field and the development of the field itself. So I wanted to just finish by talking a little bit about some of the areas. I decided to focus. The 10 themes was a little bit too much to take on in terms of the project, so I focused on 3 of them for now, wanting to continue on with the rest at a later date, right? So I looked at indigenous Central American curriculums. I took some suggestions again from the students, developed some of my own. I was looking at, for example, a book Yo Rigoberta Menchú, which is the story of a Nobel Peace Prize winner from 1992, who is a Quiché Maya from Guatemala, whose family, many family members were killed during the Civil War. And, looking at selections from her autobiography, Berta Cáceres, who was unfortunately was a Lenca land rights leader, and who was murdered in Honduras. The poet Humberto Acabal, another Quiché Maya, and the last item was a piece by Floridalma Bosch Lopez, who is also Maya, but is a professor at UCLA and talks about her experiences of being indigenous, but living in a place where from which she is not indigenous, right, and living in Southern California. Similarly, just developing some of the curriculum for Black culture of Central America. Looking at a piece called We Are Black Too, Experiences of Honduran Garifuna, right? Looking at the Garifuna culture, which has indigenous roots as well, but is a mix of indigenous and Afro-Caribbean heritage, a specific culture with a language that is in danger of dying. And so the second piece is music by Andy Palacio, who has done a lot of work to keep the language alive and is an excellent artist. And then selections from Panama in Black, which is an important book about Afro-Panamanians, both in Panama and in the United States. Lastly, U.S. imperialism in Central America, which has a lot here, right? And a lot of it unfortunately, very topical right now. Panama and the long fight for full sovereignty just made a lot more relevant with recent politics and discussions about who does and who should own the Panama Canal. But the long history of U.S. involvement, right from the very beginning, the creation of the Panama Canal, right? The second item, the first CIA-backed coup in Latin America, which was in Guatemala, right, in 1954, where a democratically elected president was ousted in a coup with a fledgling CIA behind it, and that helped set the way for a almost 40-year civil war in Guatemala, right? And then lastly, selections from a book, The Massacre at El Mozote by Mark Danner. So these were just some of the examples. I didn't really explain that last one. the massacre at El Mozote, where almost 1,000 people were massacred in the Salvadoran Civil War. So just next steps, refining the curriculum, creating the remaining modules, and getting continuous feedback from students based on some of the modules that I'm developing. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Francisco. Let's open it up to questions. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. And so questions for Francisco, Jessica, and Lisa.
I have a question for Francisco.
Yeah.
Regarding the indigenous part of the curriculum, is there any conscious design behind, put bluntly, why the starting date of primary sources post the beginning of colonialism? If the study is indigenous subjects, why is that the starting point instead of a bit earlier?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. Why? Could you repeat that?
I'm not saying this very well. But if the subject of that segment is indigenous culture in Central America, then why is the starting point after the beginning of colonialism instead of, before it, which we do, I believe, have some sources for?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't mean to imply that would be the beginning of the study. I think just some of the examples that came up, and a lot of this was driven by some of the curriculums that I reviewed. Some of it was coming from students themselves, and other curriculums that I use, or sources, I should say, that I use. I hadn't even noticed that they were all post the colonial period, but. I would definitely want to employ as well sources from before colonization of the Americas. Yep.
Okay. Other questions?
I just want to thank all three of you and bow especially to Lisa for her work on incorporating water as that element that intertwines all of the teaching for the environment and the sciences and stuff, and making it part of our identity of who we are, because it's such a crucial element for all of us to survive, dwell, and continue developing as a humanity, and having this extremely strong human aspect in your curriculum. For a science class, it's commendable. Absolutely, I want to thank you for that. It helps people grow purely intellectually, but work with prisoners is definitely not an easy one. Jessica, I wonder if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on how those incarcerated individuals respond to bringing in stories from abroad and from cultures that are potentially so removed from them.
I wanted to mention that I didn't get a chance to mention this, but when we bring in educational materials into the prison, they have to be vetted. So anything that I bring in has to be seen by CDCR, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. With the materials that we can bring in, students at Chaffey College, incarcerated students, they're able to have laptops. They use intranet, so there's only 3 websites they can visit. Our CDCR Canvas, which is our learning management system, EBSCO host, and then JSTOR. So they have 3 websites they can visit. In terms of the materials, since they have to be vetted, there's only a couple formats that we can upload materials from. So PDFs, Doc and DocX, MP4s and MP3s. So some of the materials that I plan to bring in, one of them was a PDF, the first one from the Ottoman Empire. The other 2 I've converted them to MP4s so that the students can see them. So we're kind of working with those types of things. So I just wanted to mention that. But in terms of, so I have yet to really see how bringing stories abroad will impact the students, since I'm not scheduled to teach this course until spring 2026, which got moved back because it was supposed to be like spring 2025. And then it was supposed to be fall 2025. But that's kind of how it works with prison education. Sometimes you just don't really have control over that. So I don't yet know, but I specifically chose like motherhood or like potential motherhood because that's something in which my students talk about a lot. A lot of my prisoners who are men, they're fathers. A lot of them are. But fatherhood is not a central conversation in men's prisons. Motherhood is a central conversation in women's prisons. A lot of times I allow my students will mention that I had a visit, my students who are women, that they had a visit, and they would say, oh, can I just pass my pictures around from the visit I had with my son last week? And I always make space for that, for the students to do that. So I'm imagining that with these stories, the Ottoman Empire kind of had the historical one, but also, a transnational story there, Brazil, El Salvador. I'm really hoping to elicit some connection with the women there. These are things that come up naturally. The project that I'm proposing are things in which the students always talk about, and Stanford really gave me an avenue to talk about in a global sense. So I'm really looking forward to, I'm going to report back to of how they experience that. So I will let you know. Thank you.
Just want to tell my colleague cohort, you did an amazing job. My question is to Jess about the prison education. So I know the prisons in Michigan, they don't allow online education. For obvious reasons, access to computers and the internet. But we know with lockdown browsers, you can actually lock down any activity that goes against education. And that, to me, limits the kinds of diverse thinking and education that people who are incarcerated could receive, the education, because it limits who could actually show up to that prison to teach them. Do you foresee that online education will make its way into prisons so that we do have more diversity of thought and of educators who may not be able to drive to a prison to teach them, so that could enhance the kind of learning that could take place?
I hope so. Right now, at some of the California prisons, we have correspondence courses which allow instructors to send their materials, and then the incarcerated students they fill out the materials and then send it back. So that's called a correspondence course. And when you said about online education, if a student can access through their learning management system, and they can access a truly online course in which involves things like online lectures and materials that, they have to be vetted, but materials that are at their fingertips, then I think that would really be such a positive impact for incarcerated students or for our communities in general. When we think about prison education, so many folks, at least in California, they're coming home. And with folks coming home, it's important that they come home with skills, that they come home with education. It creates such a better sort of community when we have that. So I'm hoping that we have this in more of a national way in which educators can put their diverse content and their diverse lectures and their materials online, because I think that would actually lead to just a more, just a better nation overall. Thank you for that. This is my family's in the first 2 rows, by the way. I want to thank them for all 9 of them for being here. So that's where those claps are coming from.
There I am. For Lisa, I want to echo the praise. I thought as a climate educator that it's brilliant to start with the local and then move to the global, and it traditionally has been done the other way. But I also wanted to mention for you and any other educators, any other community college educators in the room, there are 2 statewide programs that could really use this kind of expertise. West LA College, which is a community college in the LA Basin, got a $5 million grant and started something called the California Center for Climate Education. And they are looking actively to partner, especially with people in Northern California, by the way. And then I'm going to read this, but because it's a little complicated. The California Community College Chancellor's Climate Fellows Program is also currently seeking candidates from community college faculty in 4 areas: community engagement, curriculum development, workforce, and campus facilities. So if anybody's interested, I can talk to you afterward.
Thanks.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. My question is for you, and I wanted to know, is your project looking for partnerships in this area? Because my college also was very much interested. I'm from Foothill College, which is just around the hill over here, like 10 minutes from here. And we did start a small little initiative of, going to local Bay Area colleges and running some courses over there, but the project did not fly at all for some reason. We do have only one class, I think an instructor who teaches horticulture. Only that instructor made it to the prison. Nobody else made it somehow. But I was super interested in this kind of a project. So I wanted to see if you're looking for partnerships and in the Bay Area, then, we would be very much interested. And if you have any plans or if you have any ideas of how we can develop this into another project by itself, where, we are so many instructors over here. I'm sure all of us can contribute in some ways where, we can make a difference in the lives of people in the prison who do not have so much access. And they're not included in so many ways in the community just because they're in a prison. And I think that it is very important that they receive that access. And it should come from all of us. And I think it's our social responsibility to, also serve that population and not just regular students. So if you have an idea about a project or if you're coming up with something and looking for partners, I think a lot of us could be open to at least posting our material over there, if not physically ever going in those areas. But still, if we could contribute in some way, I think it's our small little ethical responsibility, being educators, to serve that population. Thank you.
Yeah. I will say it's really like for me, it is a, part of humanity, to do this type of work. And in terms of what you said about partnerships, what I learned recently is that, so at Chaffey College, we do graduate a lot of students. They have various AAs in communication studies and sociology. They're going to do journalism. Hey, Ian is going to teach that. So shout out to him too. But what I learned is some of the students that do not complete their education in the prison with us at Chaffey College because they're going home, they're on parole. From what I found out, home is actually in the Bay Area, from what I learned. So if the students are not completing their AA just yet because they're paroling or because they're going home, then I definitely see an avenue in which we can have a more stronger Rising Scholars network in which maybe they can come to your college, Mona, or just colleges in this area. And, because we teach in person, I think that kind of goes back even to Ebony's question in terms of like the online teaching, like the students would absolutely benefit from them. So I'm hoping that we can create stronger bonds all the way around when it comes to our Rising Scholar networks. Those students are so just hungry for education. They're so deserving of it. And I also call them my honor students. They are always consistently, worried about their grades. Like they're like, oh, I submitted this. Did you get it yet? And I'm like, oh man, that was an 11:59 deadline. I haven't seen it. It's Friday morning. So they are very concerned about their work. They're very concerned about doing well. And they're very concerned about bettering their lives for themselves, for their families, for their communities. So I would be ecstatic about creating those connections with all educators regarding this. So thank you for that.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, go ahead.
I'd also just like to add that, like, I would be surprised if there weren't some programs here in the area, in the Bay Area as well. There are a number of these programs. I know Chaffey is as an excellent one. It was featured on NPR. I remember hearing a story about it. But I actually, my first teaching at California Community College was also in a prison, as we discussed through Norco College. So there are a number of programs that exist, and I also would agree with you. The students, perhaps it's because, in part, there's not a lot of competition. I've never had a class where everyone did the reading. I mean, everyone was on it. It was such a pleasure to teach. There were a lot of obstacles, right, to be able to teach the materials, to teach, but just the students were a real pleasure to teach, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Francisco, Jessica, and Lisa, for your presentations. We're going to move on to the second half of the presentations for this panel. So our next speaker is Jacob Vazquez.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here and hearing all of our presentations. My name is Jacob Vazquez, and I teach ag business at Butte College, rural community college located in Northern California. I want to start by thanking Kristen and Jonas and Gary for all their support through this program, and thank you to my parents as well for being here to come see the presentation. So my course focused on connecting the rice industry. I teach ag business, the rice industry in Northern California with the rice industry in Japan. And that course for us at Butte College is AB 22, Agriculture Business 22. Just some context for the course, it's CID aligned, which means it transfers well. It's taught at other community colleges within California. It also meets general education requirements, specifically Cal Gets the Area 4, which is the social science requirement. And we offer multiple sections of this class every year, both in person and online. So why rice? I was trying to find a profound quote to talk about how rice connects the world. After a 10-minute Google search, I gave up and I just asked ChatGPT to provide a quote. And it said, rice is a food that connects the world, a humble grain that feeds more people across cultures and continents than any other. So I was trying to find this point that everyone eats rice. Couldn't find the quote, so we used AI to find the quote there. A little bit of context of where we're coming from. Butte College serves an area that's very rural and includes the service area of Butte County, which is about 207,000 people, as well as Glenn County, which is much smaller at 28,000 people. The ag industry for both counties is the top industry for each county. And within that county, rice is a leading commodity in terms of economic value for each of those counties. Here's what the overall ag commodities look like in terms of economic value. For Butte County, we can see that rice is the leading commodity. This is from 2023, which is the most recent data. And then Glenn County, we can see rice is also the number one commodity, both valued over $100 million for each county. Okay, so what my project did was develop some online modules for our online section of Ag Economics. I want to thank Gary for his connections that he provided me. Basically what happened was Gary connected me with some rice farmers in Japan that he knew personally. We had some Zooms, I gathered some information, some data, and then developed that into different modules to present to the students. And the students are actually going through those modules right now. So getting some real-time feedback on those. The two farmers that were interviewed, Kira is one of them. He's the owner of Mishu Farms in Sega, Japan. And Chia from the consulate office was helpful in establishing that connection. And the other one was Satoshi. He actually used to be a very famous drummer in a band in Japan, and now he's a farmer, and he developed a rice-based ice cream, which we're actually trying to serve here at Stanford in the coming years. And so what I thought would be most efficient would be to walk through a quick video, talk through what the curriculum looks like inside the modules. So this is the online course, and we have a 17-week semester, so we're going to go through weeks 14 and 15 in the curriculum. And so we're almost to the end of our semester at Butte College. The curriculum includes a Canvas page, and within that page is some context for what that module includes. So I start with some information about Sacramento Valley rice, which is our area and just the rice industry there. And just provide some information. This comes from the California Rice Commission, which is a rice association for the California rice industry, and then contrast that with the Japanese rice industry. So start with a little intro video and then include 2 articles that they read, one from the Rice Commission, which can be seen here. And the other one is actually a spice article from Stanford. It's a little bit older, but still a lot of good information. It talks about how the rice industry is a lot smaller in terms of scale in Japan, and is also much more culturally significant in Japan, just based off the history of rice in that country. So this is the spice article there. Can jump forward a little bit on the video. So after they do the content for the class, they take the quiz. Then after they take the quiz, there is just a reflection essay to compare the differences between the 2 industries. So the question asks, what's the difference in terms of farm size and ownership, the cultural practices, the economic values for each? And then this next module, it's a 2-part module. We go into personal stories now. So go from like a wide view to now more of a personal narrative view. And they get to learn about the 2 farmers that were interviewed. And both Akira and Satoshi were very generous in sharing pictures and videos from their operations. And that's the main content for this module is what my role was that I took their information, put into like a format that's more question and answer, and then intermix some pictures within it so they can kind of get a visual of what the industry looks like in Japan for these 2 farmers. And again, they're both very generous to share their resources and provide this information. And both do some retail products as well, so not just straight production agriculture, have some retail products. I include their Instagram handles at the end because our students like to do the social media stuff, so get a little personal connection for them. And then the next one is Satoshi. And then include a little bit about his background in terms of his drumming career. And that's Satoshi and his wife, and they farmed together in Japan. Asking them questions about their farming operation, what they think about the industry in Japan, how is technology incorporated in their production practices. So same questions for each farmer, and it's interesting to read both their responses. Both have very similar responses, and this is the rice ice cream that Satoshi developed. So after they do those 2 pieces of content, then their project is to develop a marketing plan. If they were to represent one of these farmers, how would they market their products? What platforms would they use? Try to do multiple forms of assessment, not just quizzes and essays. So they do this project, and then finally just a quick discussion of what was their biggest takeaways and what would they like to learn more from these Japanese farmers. So that's what the content looks like for the curriculum. Then I asked a couple students for their thoughts of the curriculum. This first student, I'm pretty sure she just put my question in ChatGPT and wrote me this really general answer. So I'm going to go with this one. It seems a little more actually typed out. This student said, I really enjoyed learning about rice farming from a global perspective. The video and visuals given helped me to understand further about the growing seasons and how it's used among communities and the local plants/animals. The quiz made me think and want to further learn about the difference between farming here versus places like Japan. In our write-up, we were told to expand on the farm size and its ownership, the cultural importance, economic roles, and its environmental practices of rice here in Japan. I had to branch out to learn more, and I was really surprised how different each of the prompts actually were. Overall, I think the module used effectively made us all think and learn more about global rice farming practices. And I did not give that student extra credit to say that. So that's my presentation. Again, thank you for all the support. Thank you to my fellows as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jacob. Next, we have Deborah Brown.
Hello. Good afternoon. So before I get started, I wanted to start the way that we typically start our meetings and organization and out in community, which is to begin by honoring ancestors. We heard earlier that another African person in the room has lost a loved one, Dr. Karoma, the transitioning of your father to become an ancestor. I also, my sister also transitioned a couple of months ago. And so always wanting to make sure that ancestors are present in any and all community gatherings and spaces where African peoples are. So normally we would actually use water because water, as we say, has no enemies and it gives life to the earth and to us and will always be present. So connected to what we've heard already. So just wanted to make that statement as we move into the project that I've worked on this year called Sankofa, Centering Africa and African American Studies. I am a professor of history at Riverside City College in Southern California, in the Inland Empire, for those of you that rep the IE, right? And so my project has really been a part of a long process to develop ethnic studies curriculum. My background is in Black studies, African American studies. I was actually a student here at Stanford when the program was called African and Afro-American Studies. So again, I'm aging myself. But centering Africa and African American Studies. And Sankofa is there for a particular reason. Most students of African descent here in our program, definitely here in the United States, stem from West Africa, including parts of Sierra Leone, but also parts of what is now known as Ghana. Sankofa is part of the Akan language of modern day Ghana, the Twi, and it means to go back and fetch it. And really the embodiment of that idea is that you honor the past, always with ancestors and elders in mind, that you find purpose in the present day as you are standing here, but clearly making your way forward into the future and figuring out your destiny. So that was the beginning, and really to honor the ancestors, I start just with a quick reminder that Black studies, oftentimes we think of it as a field, and really ethnic studies generally, as starting at San Francisco State. And there's little known, and we're trying to bring up the volume on this, that it actually started at a California community college. So Merritt College is home to the first Black Studies program. It officially started in 1967. This is an actual newspaper clipping of the foundation of that department. They started teaching African American Studies courses in 1964. So really the heart of Black studies and ethnic studies is seated in our institutions and community colleges. So in terms of my project, one of the things I was always taught, even here as a student at Stanford, was that the projects were always global, right? We were always thinking of African diaspora and African peoples on continent. And we had a recent change to our legislative system with the signing of AB 1460, the legislative mandate here in the state of California that requires one course to be completed for graduation in the CSU system. So because of AB 1460, we've seen a massive growth of ethnic studies, core disciplines, and ethnic studies as a larger kind of umbrella to house those core disciplines. And yet there has been primarily a focus on U.S.-specific courses, right? The mandate actually says U.S.-specific, which writes out a lot of that global component that I think is central to the work that has been done since the 60s, right? And so the project really looks to bring Africa back and center it in the way that I think many of us learned about the field and about the course. So it's really, to me, right, a project that returns to an Afrocentric, Pan-Africanist vision. So Marcus Garvey famously said, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. And so in that way, the project, even more so as I'm getting to the end of the project this year, I feel okay to say that it is overtly Afrocentric and really utilizing a paradigm that centers African peoples, their cultures, histories, and collective struggles, needs, and aspirations. In the words of Molefi Asante, who is one of the founders of Africology at Temple University, but also Pan-Africanist, right? That it is part of a larger global movement that promotes unity and solidarity of all peoples of African descent across the globe. So in terms of the project, I originally set out to complete 3 modules, very ambitious. I will say that probably like the most work was done on 1 and 2 in terms of the module completion at the end of the year. And in terms of the course material, most of it was meant to be built into 2 classes. It was going to be in an African American history course, as well as an African history course. So this semester I'm teaching the African history course, and that's been really most of the actual on the ground tweaking and building the curriculum has been in that space. Okay. So, and really, right, we bring in the African Union and an idea of restorative historical justice. There is sort of a saying amongst African historians of African descent that really we have yet really only to scratch the surface to write African history, because most of the African history we have is really African history through the eyes of the colonizers, through the eyes of Europeans. And so there is a move to engage in restorative historical justice that centers African eyes and centers African voices within the textbooks, within the record, and also struggles with this other thing, which is we've been trained in what one scholar calls colonial satellites, right? Even on continent, right? Even in Africa, so much of what we get in our curriculum is Eurocentric by design. And so how do we unsee that? Or do we unlearn it? Or how do we just, on its face say, this is what we've gotten, but we need something else that centers our experiences? So with that, I turn a little to African history and African knowledge. And I'm going to give you a few examples based on time of some of the things I've done. I am hopeful I'll get through some of them. I might not, so we'll swip through if we don't. But I do appreciate this idea stemming from Amadou Hampâté Bâ, a Senegambian thinker who said, writing is one thing and knowledge is another. Writing is the photographing of knowledge, but it is not knowledge itself. Knowledge is a light which is within man. It is the heritage of all the ancestors knew and have transmitted to us as seed, just as the mature baobab is contained in its seed. So really, arguably an open critique of the way that we have writing as the central method of the work we do. So one of the really impactful sessions that we had early on in our SPICE journey was to look at maps and really question and trouble maps. What are we doing with maps and how we envision our location within them? So this is a map that's pretty normalized, has been around for a very long time. It is the Mercator projection that, again, makes us think that we're seeing the world as it is. And fairly recently, we've received maps that look like this, the Gall-Peters map. And so I share some of these projections with my students to show that our maps have been colonized, right? That they have actually been produced for purpose, that the size of Europe and the United States specifically are quite large, when in fact the global south, specifically Africa, but also South America, are much larger in their actual iteration. So you can actually see the difference between the two. And again, what that does even just mentally, right? For students who are watching that and kind of getting a feel and a sense for what they have naturalized as banal and taken for granted, right? Another thing that I like to show them is pictures or iterations of maps of the continent of Africa, especially those with this kind of false walled border of the Sahara, which I always really try to denaturalize and trouble as a colonial construct that tries to limit the size of the continent. But also here, the fact that the way we understand regions of the continent of Africa are based on European lingual codes, which is, again, a false and colonized understanding of a map that is actually far more diverse than many of us even know, right? Within anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 languages are present in the continent of Africa. That is actually approximately 1/3 of the world's languages. And it highlights the massive diversity and connectedness of people across the continent. One of the banana things that I'm going a little brief aside, was recently filling out a form for our chancellor's office, and it asked what languages I speak, right? And as I was doing that, I looked to see if there was any African language there. Not even Swahili. There was not a single African language that was on the list of languages on that sheet. And you can see the great diversity of languages there. And for me, it highlighted the visibility and invisibility, but also the colonization that continues to be seated in our own systems. Things that we do not see, do not engage with, do not trouble enough. So with that critique, we also really found African indigenous knowledge and knowledge systems. So one of the base foundational modules that I built is on Ubuntu. And so Southern Africa, isiZulu, and there's a famous saying that says, Umuntu, Ngamuntu, Ngabantu, which is a person through other people. It's become fairly popular. We have heard it in our cultural imagination. Oftentimes, you'll find Zulu speakers and Southern Africans, but also any Bantu-speaking peoples will say there is an attempt by, unfortunately, European peoples to kind of take ownership of the term and misunderstand it, right? And so much of this lesson is really focused on trying to highlight a few, identify African knowledge systems, as well as Eurocentric worldview that shows up in the work that we do. And then also compare and contrast those systems, right? What do you have when you're looking at these things, right? So one of the things, is obviously a reading by Desmond Tutu's family member called Everyday Ubuntu that also engages in a neoliberal critique. So here you can see some of the modules, as I said, and some of the ways to end. Maybe I'll end it as I started, invoking the ancestors again, to say that even though they're no longer here, they help to guide our work, definitely in the work that I do, and can still communicate with us as guides as we continue to question and trouble the systems that we live in, but also engage in founding ourselves in beautiful indigenous knowledge. So.
All right. Thank you so much, Deborah. I wish we had more time because it's such a fascinating presentation. Finally, today for this panel, we have a double header because we have Joel Blank and Cirian Villavicencio, who have been collaborating on their project. So they will give a joint presentation.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. My name is Dr. Joel Blank. I'm professor and co-chair of the Department of Political Science at San Joaquin Delta College. And first, I want to thank Jonas and Gary and Kristen for all the help they've provided us over this last year. And I also like to do a shout out to all the EPIC fellows. They've been so helpful and getting to meet you last year and continuing the dialogue over the summer and then through the fall and winter. Thank you very much. And a quick call out to my significant other, Dr. Alika Maronik in the back. And my son is somewhere distributing, and he participated in the program as well.
Thank you, Dr. Blank. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Cirian Villavicencio, again, co-chair of the Department of Political Science, San Joaquin Delta College. I also serve as board member for the California Community College Board of Governors, and I would be remiss not to also introduce our Deputy Chancellor for the California Community Colleges, Dr. Reina Tumnang, who is joining us today here as well. So there are some resources that are being passed. We did bring our wonderful students, and you'll hear from them here momentarily, but let's go ahead and get started. The title of our presentation is Enhancing Local Governance Through Sister City and University Partnerships.
Okay, thank you. So the overview of our presentation will be the Sister City and University Partnerships with a public policy focus, a timeline, a chronology of what we did, curriculum and development and implementation of the program, our future programming, and the delivery. So we're handing out this material. One is a copy of our annual public political perspective magazine, and on pages 32 through 48, we highlight our program of Italy and the public policy focus. And then we also have a program of our recent graduation and an article on Darrell Kisson, who's in the blue shirt in the back, who talked about issues of the homeless in San Joaquin County, Stockton, and in Italy.
So wonderful. So when Dr. Blank and I started thinking about launching our study abroad program, we were considering ways that we could do something very unique. How can we partner internationally? And what came to mind was, why not look at sister cities? Does Stockton have sister cities? Well, we found out that the city of Stockton, in fact, formed a sister city association way back in the 1960s. So we managed to connect with them. And as you can see, Stockton has numerous sister cities around the world, spanning from Japan all the way to Nigeria and the Philippines. So with that, we said, hey, why don't we look at one of the sister cities that's already been established? And that was the city of Parma, Italy, which is located an hour north of Florence. And given that this was the first time that we were going to launch our study abroad program, and given that numerous universities and colleges have established programs in Florence, we probably wanted to start there, which we did. Given that we're a political science program, we wanted to focus on something to give back to our community. And so we decided to look at it from a public policy focus, because we all know that the issues that we face today, from homelessness to affordable housing to climate action to economic workforce development, they're not local issues anymore. They are global. And so there was a service component to our project, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But with that said, I'm going to give it back to Dr. Blank to talk a little bit about the timeline and the challenges we face in launching our program.
Regarding the timeline, so in 2018, we decided we do want to have a study abroad program. And let me just add on as to why Italy. We live in Stockton, which is the most diverse community in the entire country. Our students are from all over the world. We have students from Pakistan, India, the Mideast, throughout East Asia, the Philippines, Fiji. And interestingly enough, our students want to go to Italy because it's foreign to them. And not only that, in my political theory class, I talk a lot about Machiavelli, who talks about 16th century Italian politics. So in essence, we decided to go to Italy. Fortunately for our college, we have a charitable foundation. So that was helpful in creating our own foundation for our department that would fund our program. As you know, all of our students are underserved. Financial issues are really important. But this allowed us to have direct fundraising to our students. In 2019, we created a curriculum focused on Italian politics and American politics, with some focus on Parma and Stockton. In 2020, unfortunately, we all know COVID hit, and that led to the demise of the program. But in many ways, it was fortunate because the Sister Cities Association had contact with the University of Parma that enabled us to contact academics as well as administrators focused on global studies. In 2020, we started contacting University of Parma officials, and we started having Zoom sessions, I think 9:30 a.m. here and 7:30 p.m. there. Then we contact the American Institute of Foreign Studies, which is a really important organization, 60 years old, and they were able to individualize our program in terms of room, board, visits to museums, lectures, and the like. And then we met with Mayor's office, and they would recognize our students officially as ambassadors of Stockton to Parma, and also provide us with materials and links to public policy issues, as my colleague has mentioned, with regard to issues of crime, punishment, homeless, and the like. We continued our meetings with University of Parma officials and academics, with the Department of Politics, Law, and Global Studies. Delta College Foundation helped fund our program, which was really helpful in reducing the cost to our students. Also, we met with the financial aid director, who is actually a former student of ours. And let me be very clear. So if your students, your California community college students, take 6 units during the summer, they can get up to $1,600, including alumni. We brought about 7 alumni. So if they're still at a UC, Cal State, or whatever, and they haven't gotten their bachelor's degree, if they take those 6 units at your community college, they can get up to $1,700 free. So that's something to think about in terms of financing your own program. Then in the city of Stockton gave us an official proclamation. You can see that in the slide, where each student received their own personal significant of recognition. And then, of course, we launched the program in summer 2024, where we went to Italy, visiting cities of Florence, Parma, Pisa, and Rome. And we continued that with update Zoom sessions with our students and University of Parma graduate students throughout the fall. And finally, in spring 2025, our students presented to the entire community. We had officials there, elected, non-elected, NGOs there, people from the community, and of course, faculty and administrators. And you can see on the right a schedule, and I think that's page 33, 34 in the program.
Now, thank you, Dr. Blank. So our focus, once again, was public policy. How do we develop public policy skills for our students, which, by the way, is rarely taught at the California Community College level? And so we decided to focus on this area. And so we decided to teach them about comparative research. We know that there are policies that are implemented here at home and obviously implemented in northern Italy, which was our base and our location. And so we taught them how to do systems theory. And again, I don't want to complicate this, but it's public policy theory that looks at inputs, throughputs, outputs to determine the efficacy and the impact, again, of public policy. And so by teaching them this, our students were very well equipped, right, to determine whether or not these policy initiatives were in fact effective or not in terms of policy evaluation. They also were able to assess implementation. With that said, we also wanted them to look at specific topics. And as you can see, these are the topics that we focused in more greater detail. As mentioned, homelessness and affordable housing, crime and urban security, and climate action, environment sustainability, civic community and political engagement, and economic and workforce development.
So as you know, we decided to focus on the whole idea of this international collaboration with Parma, Italy, and our students. So before, we had a series of political history lectures on Italy. We also were able to bring a former student of ours, Rina Singh, who is a graduate at UC Davis. She was also a UN Millennium Scholar, and she talked about culture and social norms of Italy. She was born in Italy. She also mentioned the fact that you don't order cappuccino after 10 a.m. in Italy. A real social faux pas. And of course, she gave us some basic Italian in terms of saying thank you, saying you're welcome, etc. And then, of course, while there, we had sessions with the European Union, with Professor Dr. Di Cercina, who is the International Studies Institute, obviously University of Parma's faculty and their students, which continued, as mentioned, into the fall of 2024.
Yeah, before I leave this slide, Professor Di Cercina is up there, and these are the graduate students that our students actually worked with. Our community college students got to work with PhD students at the University of Parma. How amazing was that? With that said, focusing on curriculum, as we developed out Canvas and as we curated the materials that needed to be in the modules, here are some of the things that we put on Canvas. They include, obviously, scholarly articles from systems theory and how to obviously write public policy briefs for our students. We actually also met with Marla Livengood, who is the senior advisor for former Mayor Kevin Lincoln of Stockton. So we did do some outreach, and she was so excited to recognize our students with a proclamation, but also gave us some very important information about the current policies that Stockton is implementing regarding the issues and the topic issues that we're looking at and the directives there. And so that gave our students the understanding of these policies that's being implemented here at home that allowed them to juxtapose that with what they learned in Italy. There were obviously videos and documentaries of political history of Italy. And when we were in Europe, we had, again, those sessions, the University of Parma, those graduate students that happened while we were there, as well as some virtual ones post-travel, as well as we had the opportunity to tour the EU archives, which is wonderful. So they got to learn about the history of the European Union, the Maastricht Treaty, how that all formed together. And from there, they gave us some wonderful websites here. What we did learn, which was very critical for our public policy briefs, was that the European Union invests a lot of money that they give to local municipalities to try to innovate and find best practices when it comes to local governance issues. So this became really the framework for our students to put together their public policy briefs. And so with that said, we came home. We decided not to have this public policy forum in the fall. Why? Because it was an election year, right, last year. And so we decided to push it back to spring of this year. So on March 20th, 2025, we invited several students back, 3 of whom are with us today, and you'll hear from them later. And they presented here at our college, where Dr. Blank mentioned, we invited elected officials, community-based organization leaders, and they did a wonderful job giving their student presentations as well as their public policy recommendations. So this is the service learning component of our curriculum. We are part of the California Community College system. So in that title, community is important. What is it that our students going to give back? By the way, they did such a great job that several of them were in fact offered internships after they gave their presentations. Wonderful, right? Aligning, again, work-based needs in the program that we've already created. As you can see here are some examples. You can find this in political perspective. We don't have time to share it here with all of you. Jarrell Kizan addressed homelessness to the house pipeline. Andres Gonzalez talked a little bit about how to reduce pollution and garbage in Stockton. They learned this from Italy. Even Dr. Blank and I did some research as well. Dr. Blank took a look at how we can, again, address these urban heat islands that is so prominent in our area in the Central Valley. And one of our students, Sophia, talked a little bit about how to address urban blight here. So those public policy briefs, which we did give to elected officials, are available for you. And again, they were just so thrilled that they have these public policy recommendations that they had from our students.
So obviously this was a class, so we had to evaluate them. So the certain assessments were based upon their research papers, based upon their presentations. And let me just add, and this is really important, so it's not just looking at public policy issues of Stockton, homeless, crime and punishment. They looked at other cities, certainly in Italy, across America and across the world, to learn from them that they could bring home back to Stockton. So we don't have to redevelop or reinvent the wheel. So this is a really important international component. In fact, cities are looking at other cities now. They're bypassing the state. They're bypassing national, international governments. See what's going on in Parma, what's going on in Florence, how they can help issues in Stockton or your own local communities. And beyond that, we gave them discussion questions on politics, on social and cultural issues. And if you look at page, I think, 32 through 34, these are student threads, student experiences of their time in Italy. Now, without further ado, we have 3 students that are going to briefly talk about their experiences. We have Jarrell Kizan, Delta College, class of 2023, who's about to be he was going to graduate from UC Davis, class of 2025, and he's a Capital Fellow coming in 2025-26. He's going to talk about working with University of Parma graduate students. Noah Blank, a Delta College student as well, just graduated from San Francisco State in the fall of 2024. He's going to talk about the European archives. And finally, we have Andres Gonzalez, Delta College class of 2024, UC Santa Cruz class of 2026. And he's going to be talking about learning from Dr. Di Sarcina, who was incredibly helpful with regard to her talks on the European Union.
Hello, everyone. I'll try to be a little bit quick here. So I'm talking about the working with the University of Parma graduate students. It's actually incredibly helpful to learn how to collaborate. Academic collaboration is something that, you learn. It's very vital to, being able to write papers and being able to really understand the research, particularly when you're trying to understand different organizations that are operating in different nations. So for example, my particular paper was on this organization called Caritas that exists in Italy. And so this organization on the outright, right, if you're looking at websites and things of this nature, seems to be fairly easy to understand. But there's a lot more nuance that exists within, every government's organizations or non-governmental organizations within a community. And so being able to work with the graduate students allowed me to really, take out what was what Caritas does good, what Caritas can do, what that program model can do in the US, and how to synthesize a proper adaptation to that. And that was fundamental to that process, was working with the graduate students and understanding and having that relation with them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andres Gonzalez. I want to be telling you a little bit about what we learned from Dr. Diáspora, but more specifically, just how important it was, at least to me, to learn from someone who lives in Italy, who experiences these systems and is a subject of them at the same time. It's, I think I mentioned it to someone, it's kind of like going to government class here in the States and your professor votes, he does everything he needs to do to kind of be a model citizen, and it's the same thing going overseas. These professors knew these systems inside and out just because they had been a part of them for so long. And when you're sitting in that classroom, it kind of impresses on you the importance of citizen and like just integration into all these systems. But also it was just kind of refreshing, honestly. But I just learned so much from Professor Diáspora, as well as anyone else who took the time to talk to us. And it was just very important to our program to kind of understand this from their perspective as well.
All right, so as part of the study abroad program, we went to the historical archives of the European Union, housed in a Florentine villa dating back to the 1400s. Though it was ultimately not that useful for my research, it was still quite interesting. It was striking to look at old documents on the founding of the European project and see how much Europe was kind of built by a single group of political parties, the Christian Democrats. Robert Schuman, a French politician whose name is all over the earlier papers of the archive, was a scholar of Aquinas, and he thought of Europe in kind of explicitly Thomist terms. This was a revival of kind of even a medieval way of thinking about sovereigns as subject to the common good and the law and international institutions. The new institutions wouldn't be quite the same as the Church and the Holy Roman Empire. The sources tell me Ursula von der Leyen's coronation is imminent, but those are vaguely the terms he thought of them in. I don't know, Italy is both where medieval jurisprudence reached its flowering, which is, that's the origin of the colleges we visit at. A lot of these places started by studying canon law, and also where modern European banking began to emerge. So it's kind of the origin of the transnational networks the EU was built on. The archive building, which is a palatial villa built by a family close to the Medici, is in its own way kind of an interesting reminder of those origins.
So in terms of future activities, we are pursuing a COIL with the University of Parma, which is a collaborative online international learning. So in the fall, our students, hopefully in September, October, November, December, international relations, comparative politics, or pre-law students, will be meeting with students from the University of Parma's Department of Politics, Law, and Global Studies. And hopefully in the future, maybe a student and faculty exchange with the University of Parma. And then in 2026, we're hoping to go to Costa Rica to study democracy. It's the oldest continuing democracy in Latin America. Human rights, the Inter-American Human Rights Court is there, which I actually helped clerk for when I was a lawyer many, many years ago. And of course, climate action. They have an amazing program with regard to national parks and ecotourism program, which actually EPIC told us about because they had a program from Mission College, and we thank you for that.
And then last but not least, these are our deliverables. We really want other colleges to follow in our lead, our other political science departments, or really any other department. There's so many there's so much opportunity to create these relationships with sister cities abroad, and I think it could be replicated. We're working with our college here to basically save everything on Canvas Commons to share with everyone, so that'll be available to you soon. And you have all of the resources, again, that are available to you that we would love for you to take a look at as well. And so if you want to learn more, please feel free, again, to connect with us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Stanford University, for this amazing fellowship. And we look forward to connecting and collaborating with all of you in the future.
Okay, thank you, Joel and Cirian, and thank you also to your students for joining us. We have about 10 minutes for questions, so questions for Jacob and Deborah and Cirian and Joel.
Hi, my question is for Deborah. I recently was teaching interpersonal communications at Los Rios, and I was inspired to research the Ubuntu philosophy I couldn't find any materials on it. And so I was wondering if you're going to make your materials public on Canvas Commons by chance.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you. And that's also really exciting. I will say that I had the pleasure of doing a Fulbright Hayes group project abroad to South Africa. And that's actually where I was able to gather research and materials to build the curriculum, because much of this is not accessible to us. And some of it is language, but some of it is also where, there hasn't been resources to develop this. But yes, I do plan to put it up on Canvas Commons so we can kind of share out, and hopefully we can also build some more community for folks that are doing this work. Yeah.
Thank you.
My question is also for Professor Brown. I've asked basically the same question 3 times now, but I'm going to ask it again, which is, the goal of the curriculum is, to decolonize our understanding of Africa, which I think is an admirable and provocative one. Then why are the readings all from the 20th century and onwards? Because it's not like we have no sources from before that period. And if the goal is decolonization, then shouldn't we start with the bedrock?
Definitely appreciate the question. I will say that, so Ubuntu is not a concept that started in the modern period. It really goes on from time immemorial. And so when we mention ancestors and concepts like Ubuntu or even Sankofa is from an Ndinkra symbol. And so the 2 symbols at the beginning of my presentation are actually from the ancient period. And so maybe I didn't get a chance to say that out loud. I know time was limited, but we start the class by actually talking about African conceptions of self and how they are always and forever intrinsically linked to family, community, and how do we begin to even do that work, right? Which is why the Ubuntu project, one of the assignments is actually to do a vision board that forces you to push back against individualism and really embrace these African, indigenous, Aboriginal understandings of your connection. And so that particular book was one that was provocative for me because it includes a critique of neoliberal capitalism and whether it is ever compatible with African indigenous knowledge systems. And so that's why I selected it. It's also very readable for students. The Adinkra and really written sources are harder. So one of the other assignments that I do is really focused, kind of like Elvid's project, on storytelling and trying to get oral records and oral histories, because again, like the first quote from Hamad Hampate Ba, we have an overwhelming focus on written, and at times it means that we make invisible those things that have been there for a very, very, very long time. And I think that's a struggle, especially so with the continent of Africa and African history and even African diasporic peoples and African diasporic history, right? We still are doing this work with African American history, right? Like that. But you're exactly right? That we need to maybe be intentional about saying that there are things that are coming from the ancient and early modern periods, but also what those look like. What's the periodization, and question some of those, because those should also be part of that very overt conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to just thank the faculty. You make me want to be back in the classroom with all of the interdisciplinary, really exciting work that you're doing. And I am just looking forward to amplifying, all of this panel here, but also the earlier panel. I know that I missed the morning session and I'll probably miss the next one, but I've got ideas. So thank you, Cirian, for inviting me. I also wanted to follow up on my colleague Scott Langford's comment earlier about potential opportunities at the Chancellor's Office for California. So we are building out with our Board of Governors at the retreat in February thinking through international education, global education in its broadness, including study abroad. And I was just recently in a meeting, Deborah, with our colleagues with the African American male education development folks, and we're thinking of launching a demonstration project on the work that they've been doing in Ghana with Pan-African virtual college. So anyhow, we'll provide more detail there. And then the other thing that I wanted to also mention for everyone is that we have opened up our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Accessibility Institute. So we are integrating and bringing in our climate action work, which is also a Board of Governors priority, and then likewise with our generative AI, and we want to really maintain the humanizing aspect of it. So I will be reaching out to all of you, inviting you to do sessions with us, and that's upcoming in the fall. So just a lot of opportunities. And then the last thing that I wanted to say too is another hat that I wear is I'm on the board for the American Association of Community Colleges, which encompasses 1,038 community colleges outside of California. So colleagues here who are outside of California, I'd like to also stay in touch with you so that I could find ways to actually amplify your work, because global education is so critical, you know, not only for our students, right? We are in a diaspora, we're in an interconnected world, and we cannot retreat back into isolation and nativism. That's all I want to say.
We have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Well, then I have two in one. One question for Jacob. Jacob, are you, when you're continuing your work, are you thinking of, adding other rice-producing economies into your mix, in a sense of try to even diversify the global content you already have? And Joel and Cirian, for you, a question, since Stockton has 6 or 7 sister cities around?
I think it's 7.
The world, were you thinking of doing anything with those other ones as well?
In fact, in 2020, is this working? In fact, in 2028, we're hoping to go to Shimizu, Japan. And again, EPIC through Gary has put us in contact with someone already there. So that's obviously something we'd like to do. So in 2030, maybe we'll go to another sister city, 2032. We'll have to see. We'll take it one city at a time.
Awesome.
And my answer would be yes. The big vision, multiple different areas incorporating the modules. So
thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we got Don over there with one final question. Yeah.
So this one's also for Jacob. If you need research or articles about rice production in Thailand, let me know. Cirian and Joel, if you're going to go to Japan, they don't really have much of a homeless issue. I'll tell you why, or have articles or research for that. California is changing their strategy for homelessness. And since you're using Italy, if that doesn't work, I heard that Switzerland, I know it's not in your list, but they don't have that much of a homeless problem. If you do decide to go to Switzerland, let me know.
Yeah, and I would just also call attention to Jarrell Kissen's public policy presentation poster. It's in the Political Perspective magazine, and those are pages 42 through 48 as well. But thank you very much for that insight.
Well, thank you, everyone, Lisa, Jessica, Francisco, Jacob, Deborah, Joel, Cirian, for your wonderful presentations and projects. It's been such a pleasure to get to work with you. And the round of applause.